Alright, so the third episode that was released on day 1 of X-Men 97 Season 2 was episode 3. The past episode, titled Rise of Apocalypse Part 1, and yes, this is a part 1 of 2. The next part comes out next week. It will wrap up this story, hopefully leading us into the present day. In this video, I'm going to spoil everything that's gone on so far, up to and including episode 3, but I'm not going to talk about episode 4. So Forge explains the plan him and Bishop set up, the plan that we've already talked about, why it's bad on the Forge side. Let's talk about why it's bad on the Bishop side, because yes, it is dumb to not send Bishop to the future, since Bishop's mutant power is that he can absorb energy weapons and redistribute that energy as either strength or blasts. And like all the weapons in the future are usually energy weapons, but instead we sent Forge there because that's where his girlfriend is. So it's weird that we didn't send Bishop to the time where everyone was using energy weapons. It feels even weirder, and I've seen a lot of people point this out. I'm not saying this is exclusively my observation, but it seems like a pretty bad idea to send Bishop into the past instead of the character who can build a time machine from scratch. Because that's Forge's mutant power. He can forge anything. He can make any machine, no matter what it does, and he doesn't need to know how it works. In fact, he usually doesn't know how it works, but he can still build it. So in case, I don't know, something goes terribly wrong, let's say Bishop goes back to the past, but the time machine's broken, it would be really handy to have a character that can make his own time machine out of, like, sticks and rocks. But whatever, I'm not in charge of the X-Men. This is the other reason it's crazy to me that Mother Ascani, knowing who the X-Men are, sent some of them to the past and some of them to the future, and chose to send Magneto to the past. Because in the first episode, Mother Ascani's talking about we can't influence the future, it may make things dangerous, it may make things different, but then she sends to the past the only character who is specifically definitely going to do that, and that's Magneto, and you see him talking to Apocalypse here. Luckily, Magneto is cool now, and all he's trying to do is convince Apocalypse to be good, which is great. Maybe Mother Ascani just really doesn't like Magneto, I don't know. But what we will find out is Magneto realizes correctly that Apocalypse does not have any good influences right now. There's Ball, the warrior who adopted him, who we'll talk about, but Ball believes in survival of the fittest. That's his ideology, and that is an ideology that is passed on to Apocalypse and will define the character. And that's why Apocalypse is so dangerous, is because he's trying to kill everybody, because evolution will sort everything out. The strong will survive, and usually that means mutants, but sometimes that means that strong mutants will survive and the other mutants won't. So Magneto's here basically saying, hey Apocalypse, you shouldn't kill, it's bad. And I think Magneto makes a lot of really good points. It's interesting seeing a Magneto who is actively trying to convince somebody to be good. While Magneto is talking to Apocalypse, and Apocalypse asks Magneto what he wants to turn Ensabanor into, Magneto says,
"With my guidance, a god among insects."
Which is reminiscent of his line from X2.
You are a god among insects. Never let anyone tell you different.
And we see that Apocalypse and his forces are trying to take over a stronghold ruled by a character who is very interesting. Another great thing about this episode, the voice cast is incredible. First, you have Ensabanor, who has a different voice than Apocalypse. And I think that makes sense. On one hand, the Apocalypse voice exists in X-Men 97, and that is based off of the Apocalypse voice from X-Men the Animated Series. It's a very distinct voice, and it's done very well, I think, by Ross Marquardt. However, Apocalypse is an Egyptian man, so it'd be a little weird to have him, before he uses all the technology that modulates his voice, to have him also voiced by Ross Marquardt. So this version of Apocalypse, let's say young Apocalypse, he's voiced by Adetokunbo McCormack, and the performance is great. I would be fine with just pretending this is kind of always what Apocalypse sounds like, and modulating his voice, and having this be the new Apocalypse voice, but I understand why they want to keep the voices separate. And I really do like what Ross Marquardt is doing. So we see the capital city that Apocalypse is trying to invade, and in the center of it is an interesting gold sphere, reminiscent of the sphere in Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania that a certain Kang is so obsessed with retrieving. And that is probably because the character who Ensabanor is going up against is Rama Tut, which is one of the more well-known variants of Kang. And in this episode, Rama Tut is voiced by John Delancey, who most people probably recognize as playing Q on Star Trek The Next Generation, which makes sense because from what I understand, Q is sort of an omnipotent god figure, and that's sort of what Kang is, or at least that's what Kang portrays himself as. By the way, John Delancey, also very famously in a Nebula short called Identities, Nebula Plug. Another interesting voice, Deborah Wilson is playing a character called Kandra. Kandra is very interesting because she is part of a group of X-Men, or not X-Men, but X-Men characters called the Externals. These are characters who are immortal and have existed for a very, very, very long time. Selene, probably the other most famous External, and then Cannonball was an External, but we don't really talk about that story because nobody likes it. But interestingly, Kandra is also connected to the Thieves Guild, all the way back to the Egyptian Thieves Guild, but this is a character who is very connected to Gambit, someone who is going to be very important this season. Kandra has been in the X-Men animated series before, in episode 2 of season 6, but I think the inclusion of that character is very interesting. Also, it's interesting because the concept of externals was barely a thing when the X-Men animated series originally came out. It was invented for the first time in 1992, and while they did scratch the surface of some more contemporary stories, that wasn't most of what X-Men the Animated Series was exploring. So I love the idea of taking source material that has been introduced between when X-Men Animated Series ended and now, or just source material that's been expanded upon, and putting that in X-Men 97. Because it's cool. We also get a character named Chris Britton who is playing one of Rama Tut's generals, Logos. Now Chris Britton, you have already seen in X-Men 97. You've also already seen them in X-Men Animated Series, where they voice Mr. Sinister. So they're the Mr. Sinister here too, but also they take on this voice role. I think they're terrific. They sound super cool. They were also Odin in one of the animated Thor movies, and two really interesting roles. One, they're the voice of Iron Man in the Marvel vs. Capcom games. So when you hear Proton Cannon, that's Chris Britton. And then Chris Britton is also in one of the funniest scenes in any movie, which is the interview in Good Will Hunting, where Will is supposed to go, but instead he sends his friend Chucky, played by Ben Affleck, who is not a math genius, and just uses the opportunity to get some cash out of everybody.
Retainer. The business we have heretofore, you can speak with my aforementioned attorney.
And then the other new voice actor in this episode, because that's not all. You get Michael Dorn playing Ball. Now, people that have been keeping up with this channel know Michael Dorn as the voice of Battle Beast in Invincible. Obviously, he's also another Star Trek alum, playing Worf the Klingon in The Next Generation. And for the same reasons he is a cool Battle Beast, he is a cool Ball. Because Ball, much like Battle Beast, believes in conquest, believes in survival of the fittest. Also, just another guy with an awesome voice. But anyway, then we get the central conflict of this episode. It is an argument between Professor Xavier and Magneto. Magneto has been counseling Noor, who, by the way, in another video, and I do genuinely appreciate when you guys point stuff like this out, because especially with comics like the X-Men, there's so many things you read and you kind of internalize, and then those things are wrong. But in my Nando v Movies video, I mentioned that Apocalypse's name is En-Sabah Nur, and that translates to the first one. That's not accurate. I think I heard that on X-Men Evolution, where a lot of my X-Men knowledge started from.
He named him En-Sabah Nur, which means the first one.
It's actually the Seven Lights, which makes sense because Seven, Saba, yeah. So Professor X thinks he's very reasonable, warning Magneto, we can't mess with time. Even though they've clearly already messed with time. The argument Magneto makes throughout the episode is basically, like, this guy was raised by a warlord, and he is our greatest enemy. What if, instead of that, he was around somebody who said, hey, do nice things? Even if he internalized only a little of that, maybe Apocalypse wouldn't be such a problem in the future. And Charles yells at Magneto, but honestly, I think Magneto's making a great point. Professor X gives this big list of all the reasons Apocalypse is so much trouble.
His name is Apocalypse. Bringer of chaos, Lord of destruction, the X-Men's most diabolical foe, an immortal madman known for crushing his enemies, not capturing them.
And if Magneto's argument of, hey, maybe he wouldn't be a supervillain if someone gave him an alternative option, he also makes the good argument that Rama Tut clearly is from the future. Forget about Beast just building a time machine, Rama Tut might just have a time machine. So if they work with En-Sabah Nur, it's possible they can get it. One fun detail here that I've seen a couple people point out, Rama Tut is putting up new statues of himself and replacing the old Pharaoh. However, the old Pharaoh kind of looks like Kang, and specifically the version of Kang that was Rama Tut that we saw in Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania, specifically the headgear, which isn't that unique to Kang. But some people see the idea of this one statue being toppled and replaced by the other statue as a representation, perhaps from the animators, of how Marvel probably would have had original Jonathan Majors Kang here, but because of everything that happened with him, he has been replaced with a different version of Kang, this Rama Tut. So En-Sabah Nur tries to storm this city, but Logos has buried a bunch of golden robots under the sand and they get all of En-Sabah Nur's guys. And luckily they're all robots, so it's not that big of a deal if we watch En-Sabah Nur cut them all in half. And then Sabanor, let's talk about him for a second. What are his powers? Because if you've never heard of this character, you're out of luck. They're not going to explain how he works, at least not in these 3 episodes. Basically, Apocalypse is a mutant with complete control over his body down to the molecule. So he can augment his strength, he can grow, he can turn his arms and legs into weapons, and I don't even know if he knows how to do that yet. He is also an external, like Kandra, which means he is functionally immortal, and this is important if you've seen Apocalypse before and you're like, yeah, but he doesn't look like that now, he is going to merge with technology that is going to grant him even more superpowers, even more knowledge. He has the ability to fly, he has psionic energy, he can teleport, he can pretty much do whatever he wants. But all we're seeing here is the strength, because Sabanor has not yet encountered the technology that is going to enhance his mutant abilities, and because he hasn't really trained using them because he doesn't really know what being a mutant is. Right? Like, if you couldn't fly and you didn't know anybody that could fly, you wouldn't know to try to fly. And Sabanor just knows how to be strong and fight. But he's very strong. As we see, he's able to knock down this door, and he's able to pick up and toss this elephant. Now, I would say the animation in all 3 of these episodes has been very good. This episode feels like it maybe has the slickest animation so far. A lot of it comes down to these fight scenes. I don't know exactly what it is, but it looks terrific. We get moments that very subtly foreshadow the fact that Sabanor is going to become Apocalypse, but Magneto is able to convince Sabanor not to kill Logos and to instead capture him. Then we check on the rest of the X-Men that are left in the past. Nightcrawler, Rogue, and Beast. What they've been doing this whole time is sneaking around, getting pieces of the robots and the aftermath of Sabanor's battles, and Beast has been trying to reverse engineer one of them into a time machine. Now, Beast is a very smart character, but he is not time machine smart. At least this version of Beast isn't. But he's doing his best. But Charles explains Magneto's plan of using Logos to figure out how to do time travel, because perhaps the Pharaoh Ramatut knows. Then Beast yells at Magneto because apparently it's Yellow Magneto Day, even though, again, Magneto's making a lot of good points. And when someone brings up the very reasonable idea of Professor X just reading the General's mind, something he seems totally capable of doing, as far as our guys know, this guy is just a guy. Sure, he works for Ramatut and has access to technology, but that doesn't mean Ramatut would give him resistance to psychic attacks. And then we find out that Magneto has gone even further and is saying, it is Apocalypse's destiny. He is prophesized to save the world. Now listen, we know how this is going to go. But again, Magneto, I get it. I think this is a solid move. And then after Apocalypse almost kills Logos, for no good reason, just reveals to Xavier and Magneto that Pharaoh Ramatut is on the verge of discovering something very powerful. And between that and the fact that characters this episode have been throwing around words like cosmic, it's clear that he is talking about a piece of celestial technology that Apocalypse is traditionally destined to find, but the X-Men believe they can use to power their time machine. Professor X jumps into Apocalypse's mind, which is just a bunch of floating pyramids, but he is sucked into some sort of trap because everybody's minds are booby-trapped these days. And we see a couple of things that are interesting. We see a planet or a moon with a strange design carved into it. The design itself is not interesting, but what it leaves behind does kind of look like a helmet. And yes, it is similar to the helmet Magneto wears, but that's also kind of similar to the helmet another X-Men villain wears, because it is a combination of Professor X and Xavier called Onslaught. Now, for people who followed X-Men 97 Season 1 and our coverage there, a lot of people thought that the end game of that season was also going to be Onslaught, partially because it seems like it might have been at one point, and because the comic Fatal Attraction that a lot of the finale of Season 1 was based on leads directly into Onslaught. Now, do I think that's where this season is going? I don't know, in 50-50. On one hand, if there was a time to do this storyline, it was earlier. It was at the end of Season 1. Especially because we already have a big bad that is a big problem, and that's Apocalypse. Now, maybe we'll do some sort of fusion of Apocalypse and Onslaught, where Apocalypse absorbs Magneto and Xavier. But a lot of people have, and I'm not surprised that this happened, thought that this moon or planet looks like it might be teasing Onslaught. In fact, a lot of people thought that this voice that Professor X hears was from Onslaught. But if you look at the credits, it is a figure who should be familiar to people who watch the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and specifically Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1, Aeson the Searcher, one of the Celestials. Professor X is told by Aeson that this is where the end begins, funny enough, in front of the Sphinx, which in Marvel Comics, the Sphinx is the name of a very powerful villain, not one that's that connected to the X-Men. Because it's funny, as much as the X-Men are connected to Apocalypse through Egypt, Ramatut is really a Fantastic Four villain, and obviously characters like Moon Knight have a connection to Egypt. Funny enough, the character that the Sphinx is most connected to is Nova, a character who that specific version of the Rick Rider version we've not seen any of in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And then when all the mutants get back to the secret room I guess they built into this fortress, it turns out Ball and all his guys found it too, and Professor X, the super telepath, was not able to sense this. And Magneto, the super magnetism guy, was not able to sense any of this new metal that was in the room. But in this instance, N7 is mad at the X-Men, because they've clearly deceived him. However, to what degree they have deceived him is up for debate. Nur beheads General Logos, and it turns out General Logos either was a robot or had robotic parts implanted into his body, because he sends a signal out to Ramatut, who now knows where Logos is, and that means knows where N7 and Ball are. So Ramatut is just going to fire a big laser at them all and kill them. And luckily at this moment, before N7 is able to kill the X-Men, Bishop reveals himself and gives everybody their time bands and says, "Let's go," and they dawdle, which means there's just enough time for Nur to fight back and keep everybody busy until they are shot by Ramatut's hyper beam, or whatever that is. Also wonderful that Bishop uses the name of the decade one last time.
We need you back in the 1990s.
Like I said, this is a two-parter. This is the midway point between episodes 3 and 4. Are half of the X-Men dead? Who knows? Maybe. But overall, I think this episode's a lot of fun. I love any episode where Magneto and Professor X are having an argument, and Magneto is clearly right. I mean, put it in the comments or tweet it to me or whatever if you disagree. But I feel like if done well, this could have solved all of their problems. Now, it's the X-Men, so some other weird problem would have shown up, sure. But if Apocalypse really is
the X-Men's most diabolical foe,
it's worth a shot. I will say, even though Beast, Nightcrawler, and Rogue are here, you don't really get much of them in this fight. Even though N7 knows they are mutants, he doesn't ask them to come with him to help fight. But now it's not going to matter, because he's going to have to fight them. And as far as how this fight's going to go, it's pretty much all in Magneto and Rogue's hands. Because Magneto is easily the strongest mutant here, and Rogue is an excellent wild card because she can absorb mutant powers. Maybe that means absorbing Apocalypse. Now, she won't be able to kill him because, like I said, he's immortal, but I don't know, maybe she could throw him into the sun or something. So those are the first 3 episodes. We checked in on all of the X-Men, all of the timelines. They're all connected in what I believe are pretty interesting ways. And listen, if you love the X-Men, like I do, you love superpowers, you love messy relationships, a lot of fantasy tropes, which reminds me of a video I was watching called Time to Pivot to Romantasy, I guess, by one of my favorite creators, Lindsay Ellis. In it, Lindsay talks about the romantasy genre, which I was fascinated by. I've been hearing about it for years, never really knew what it was. And I think Lindsay's perspective on it as an author who writes about something that's kind of similar is really interesting. I would say it's definitely worth a watch, whether you are a big fan of romantasy or, like me, someone who has heard about it a lot but doesn't really know what it is. And you can find that video along with tons of other videos on this video's sponsor, Nebula. Nebula is a subscription streaming platform that I and a bunch of other YouTubers you probably already love helped to create. First thing that's important, all of our videos go up there early and ad-free. So if you want to be the first person to see one of my Nando V movies or Nando cut videos, Nebula is for you. And then there are series like Jetlag or Tom Scott's England, where they go up on Nebula a week before they go anywhere else. Then we also have Nebula exclusive series of videos, like Tom Nicholas has a series called Slow News Day. Captain Midnight has a series called Showrunners, where he looks at different people that have created television shows. The first episode is about Rod Serling in The Twilight Zone. The second episode is about Vince Gilligan in Breaking Bad. Looks at the journey of how they got to where they were and how that shaped the series they would showrun. And then Curious Archives Gods and Monsters series looks at these different legendary creatures from religion and mythology and talks about how the ideas of those creatures has evolved over time and they've turned into pop culture characters. So you can find all that great stuff exclusively on Nebula. And a year of Nebula is already a steal at $60 a year. That is $5 a month. But if you go to go.nebula.tv/thenandocut, you can get Nebula for just $2.50 a month. That is $30 for the year. It's an awesome deal. Go check it out. I guarantee there is a creator you already love who's part of Nebula. And if you spend some time on Nebula, I bet you'll find your new favorite creator. After me, of course. Your second favorite creator because I'm your favorite. Don't correct me. Again, that is go.nebula.tv/thenandocut. That's all I got. Stay safe. I'll see you around.